What would change in the world if you, me, and everyone choose to feed the wolf of possibilities instead of the one of doubt, distrust, and despair? The way I see it, our point of view creates reality, not the other way around. Somewhere deep within, I think we know that. In this podcast, I am daring you to claim this remarkable superpower. Join us and be inspired by trackers, explorers, and finders of possibilities from the multiverse of hope. Welcome to the podcast, Feeding the Wolf of Possibilities, with your host, Katarina Valentin. So welcome to today's episode of Feeding the Wolf of Possibilities. And today we are exploring lust. What is it really? And what does it create for you and the world? And why on earth is lust considered one of the 7 deadly sins? So as my guide, I've invited the brilliant Chris Hughes, a Canadian hedonist who is willing to lust after more things and more people than I could ever imagine. Such an inspiration. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you so much for having me, Kat. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So what is lust for you?
To me, lust is the joy that you feel when you see something that you just have to have. Like when you walk through a candy store of all the juicy, glittering, beautiful things that you cannot resist. And that when you see them, it takes away all of the reservations that you have, and you're willing to just abandon all reason to have a really good time.
Oh, I love that. So that goes for people too, I'm assuming.
Yeah, that goes for people, that goes for everything in your life that you're excited to create.
So do you have to have it? Like, is lust connected to the possibility of possibly having it? Or can you just lust for things, whether or not you could see you having them in the future?
Oh, I think there's actually a lot of joy in lusting for things that you can't have.
Tell me more.
Well, have you ever been teased? And I don't mean teased as in made fun of, but there was an article that came out yesterday that I read in the New York Times, and it was about some of the new terms and terminology people are using for different relationship scenarios. And one of the things that they were talking about is a phenomenon called breadcrumbing, where you leave a trail of breadcrumbs for a potential lover, and you suggest to them constantly that, yes, you'd like to catch up. Yes, you'd love to have that drink, but you may or may not. And I think that there is some joy in actually longing for someone, yearning for them, or even not even a person, just a possibility, a thing. And it may never be fulfilled, but just in the longing for them, they introduce you to a possibility. They show you something that you would actually like to have, and that's a gift.
That is so true. And I can even see that sometimes I am more willing to lust for things when I have the point of view that I can't have it. Like, I'm more willing to indulge in that whole breadcrumb scenario than actually going there.
Yeah. Well, have you ever had the experience of going shopping when finances are a little tight and you know you shouldn't be necessarily splurging and indulging, and you find all these things that you want to have because you know spending the money is not the best idea? And then on the opposite side, going shopping when you have plenty of money and you kind of look around and go, there's nothing really here that I must have.
Yes. Oh, that's a brilliant description too. So when did you start exploring lust in your life?
Look, Kat, I have always been a very sexual person, and never shy about what I wanted, what I desired. Even as young as 5 or between 5 and 7 years old, I can't remember. I remember learning about the joy of masturbation and thinking, wow, this is an amazing gift. what a treat this is. And I wanted everyone to know about it. And I wanted everyone to see that this is something they could do. So I set up a tent in my front yard and invited all the boys over in the neighborhood so that I could show them what they could be doing with their penis to be having a wonderful time. So from a very early age, I had the point of view that enjoying yourself and enjoying your body was one of the greatest gifts we have.
Which is such a gift. And it takes most people years to get to that point where you start even looking at like this as a gift, that we have it available. Masturbation, you don't need anyone else for that. You're always available for this particular pleasure. So exactly. How did the boys receive it?
Most of them fairly well. Their parents not so well. But you know what's wonderful is even though their parents that called my mother and said, you know, I obviously am a bad person, or I need to be taught what's appropriate, et cetera, it never deterred me. It never made me stop and go, oh, I'm wrong here. I shouldn't be doing this. I always was so clear that no, this is fun. We really oughtn't judge this, even at that age. You know, so many people that I speak with, because I do seminars about this and I talk to a lot of people privately about things that are going on for them sexually or with relationships or, and it's always alarming to me the number of people whose frame of reference of sex is abuse, or they had an experience when they were a child that was actually really quite innocent and clean, and they were exploring something with either just their own body or a friend's. I mean, prepubescent, which is a really normal thing to occur, but were caught doing it or something and shamed for it. And so many of them have carried that shame their entire lives. And I think that is incredibly sad. And one of my targets with all of this, and this topic in particular, is to get people out of that and get them to a place of freedom with exploring what pleasure they can have with their body and what joy is available through sex and through lust.
Well, you recently became single after having a nearly 10-year relationship. So how did that change the way you be with lust? Well,
if I'm honest with myself, it was clear to me much earlier than I realized that the relationship was done and that I wasn't happy with what was occurring there. And as a result, the sex did all but disappear. And what was amazing to me there was how much it aged my body, how much weight it put on my body, just because that element of joy was gone from my world, because I was a silly romantic and stayed faithful and stayed monogamous because that was my promise. So in that case, I did actually give up what I knew was true with sex to stay married. And since becoming unmarried, what has been really incredible was I had a moment when I first got divorced where I thought, uh-oh, here I go. I'm in my 40s. My prime is over. I'm not going to have the kind of fun, free sex that I had younger. And what I discovered was, oh my God, I'm having way more fun than I was then.
So I'd love to explore two things of what you said. One is how lust actually, when we allow lust to be part of our lives and our living, how it changes our bodies. So could you explore that a little bit?
Well, within lust, there's this generative energy of being alive. You know, when you see something that it gives you this breath of enthusiasm, and it's glorious. It's like a bloom bursting forth in the spring. It's like the gift of an erection in the morning. It's not just in the morning. It's this incredible expression of life. You know, I hope that we all and our listeners out there have had the experience of seeing someone or having someone in their life that you see them and you just want to tear their clothes off. You just cannot help it, or cannot think of anything else but, oh my God, I cannot wait to get somewhere where I can rip those clothes off of you and we can have a wonderful time together and do beautiful things to each other's bodies.
And it reminds me, so when I'm having a lot of lust, it's like every molecule in my body vibrates. And food isn't very interesting, except if it's very delicious food. But in general, it's like every single part of my body comes alive in those moments. Like you say, when you want to tear somebody's clothes off, and that's all you can think of. So it's kind of like a vibration that actually allows the body to come alive in a different way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because it doesn't have to be sex. It doesn't have to be, well, I think it's actually really valuable to differentiate between lust, sex, and copulation and love. They're all four are very different energies and create something different for you, for your body, and how you relate to people based on those energies. Lust and sex are not the same thing. That's that sexual energy and that desire to copulate with one another is often accompanied by lust, but you can have lust for so many things. Like you mentioned food. Lots of people do have lust for food, and there's this passion, for lack of a better word, that they feel for eating. And some it's fashion, some it's business and creation, some it's travel. For me, one of the other areas outside sex that it's adventure. I always like my life to feel and be an adventure where I meet unusual and interesting people and end up in situations and experiences that you wouldn't have expected or planned on. To me, that is an energy of lust as well. This embracing of life and living and enjoying the moments that you have to the absolute most you can. Here I'm in Australia and it's summer. And one of the things that's so brilliant in Australian summer is some of the fruit that we have, whether it's pineapples or mangoes. And I love to take a mango and eat it in the shower because I can absolutely enjoy the fuck out of it and make a huge mess. And I'm in the shower, so it just all washes away.
Oh, that made me want to eat a mango in the shower right now, at this moment. So you recently did a call with Gary Douglas, the founder of Access, that was called When Lust Turns to Love, Where Does the Sex Go? And since you started to talk about this difference between, copulation, lust, and love, and how they are different things, can you talk a little bit to what you got to there? Where does the lust go? Where does the sex go when lust turns to love?
Yeah, great question. I mean, sex, the energies of sex, if you want to kind of break it down into component parts, there's a nurturing to it, there's a kindness to it, there's caring, there's a sensual element to it, and so on and so on. Those all tend to be there when you're having lust and you're really enjoying one another. But what happens when you decide you love each other is it tends to become a relationship. And our dear friend Gary Douglas with Access Consciousness, what he's shown us about relationship is it's the defined distance between two things. So there's this separation that goes on once you decided you love one another. Like you mentioned my ex-husband, and I'll never forget, we'd have arguments. And to make up for the argument, he would text me or call me and say, "Oh, but I love you." And I just remember saying to him, "I understand that, but do you actually like me? Do you like who I am? Or is this love this defined distance and separation that tells you who I am based on a projection or an image that you've built of me, but you're not actually talking to me. And when you lust for someone, you tend to lust for who they actually are, not a projection. And it tends to come before you've established this relationship of distance. So you have this joy of experience with one another. Is this making sense?
Yeah, it's brilliant. And one of the things that it also brings up is how lust is actually more inclusive, because you can lust for several people at the same time or several things at the same time, and it doesn't actually influence anything, while love tends to be way more defined in that it should be one person or in a specific set of circumstances, like you love your child. It's a very different thing than what you talk about with lust.
What I think is important is we give ourselves the freedom to start to explore and enjoy what we actually enjoy. Since I've become single, it's been such a fun adventure to look again at what sexually do I really like. And no kink, no taboo, off limits, just go for it and see. And I've ended up in amazing conversations with people who have these areas that are turn-ons for them, and they're not necessarily for me. Like, I spoke to a guy the other day who is really into wearing diapers and ladies' undergarments. And okay, great. But why is that judged? He's not hurting anybody. And people seem to want to project on someone like that, well, there must be a psychological disorder that has led them to that. I don't buy that as true either. They just like it. So what?
Well, when you became single again after 10 years and you started to explore this, and you had the point of view that in your 40s, there would be less sex to have. Can you talk a little bit about what it is that actually has become available in your 40s that wasn't necessarily available, in our 20s and 30s, that according to this world somehow is the age when you're supposed to have a lot of sex and you're supposed to find your partner, you're supposed to create this relationship for the rest of your life. What is available for you now that wasn't available then?
Yeah. First of all, we live in a different world than we think we do sometimes. We think that, okay, I'm in my 40s, that means life is over. And what I've discovered is, no, the younger people of today don't have necessarily the hangups and points of view that older generations have. And there is a generation of people out there so willing to explore different things. Like, I was amazed thinking in my 40s that was it. And suddenly I'm extremely attractive to men in their 20s. And when I was in my 20s, getting a man in his 20s to be interested in me seemed next to impossible at the time. So at the moment, I'm just going, goodness, what do I do with all these?
So is that particularly, you think, for gay men, or is it something that is for any sex?
I've spoken to women in their 50s who have, in similar circumstances, just left a very long-term relationship and found exactly the same thing. That there is a different landscape out there now than people expect. And there is actually a willingness in the younger generations to explore things in a totally different way. And, we were talking about how during that call about lust, no one wanted to talk about sex. I'm so encouraged by what I see in the younger generation and younger generations, because there are less hangups, is what I'm observing, and not just with gay people.
So one of the things on this call that you and Gary talked about was that lust is an element of living. So I was looking at what would it create in the world if lust was not judged but welcomed? What would that change for the way we live our lives?
Personally, I really think it would take away a lot of the things that we fight about. If no one's lust was judged and they were allowed to express it freely, I think it would take out a huge area where we try to make some people right and others wrong, and just allow people that much more freedom to be themselves, which to me is so important.
And really opens up for living, actually living your life, not just having a life, but living it fully.
Yeah, because how much of your life is suppressed if you're not willing to have that energy of lust?
Like a huge part of your life.
Yeah.
So before we end, I was wondering if you could give some kind of suggestion to anyone listening to this who would like to start exploring lust for themselves. Like, where could they start? What could they play with?
Great question. Go have a look at what's actually true for you. Like, what are your turn-ons actually? And I don't just mean sexually, but in life. Is it business and creation? Is it the sensual, hedonistic aspects of life? Like, is pleasure what's really important to you? And also sexually, find out, like, what would you like to explore? Have you ever allowed yourself the freedom to be tied up or be spanked or try on a costume or explore different toys? Go and see. And if you had no points of view based on your culture and your religion, what would actually be fun for you? And that finding out may take some trial and error, as it were. You know, there's a great podcast that I love listening to from a guy, I can't remember his name. Savage Love is the name of the podcast. And he has been around forever. He started doing a syndicated newspaper column where people would write in questions and he'd give them really candid, no holds barred advice. And it's morphed into a podcast. And he talks about being a lover who is game. And he means game to try things. And that's one great thing to look for in a partner. Someone who isn't going to say, no, that's not for me, but who's willing to go with an open mind. I don't know. I'm not sure if diapers are my thing. Let's give it a shot.
And, you know, that kind of goes for life too. What if we were willing to be game for life? Like, what if we were willing to actually try things that come up, having that adventure of lust, whatever that looks like for us?
Yeah. Exactly. Whatever that looks like for you. And if you don't like sex, you can still have the energy of lust. Because there are people out there who are not interested in sex, and that's okay. You're not wrong if you happen to be more on the asexual side.
You can still have lust.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Chris. A wonderful conversation. We'll put the links both to the podcast that Chris mentioned and to the call with Gary Douglas below. So if anybody wants to explore this more in depth and in a different way, you can also dive into those.
Thank you so much for listening to my podcast, Feeding the Wolf of Possibilities. I hope you have more space in your world now. If you would like to listen to earlier episodes, share with other people, or subscribe, please go to Spotify, iTunes, or visit katrinavalentin.com/wolf.